1930, Canada. The dust apocalypse where thousands lost everything. The morning of July 5, 1931, started like every other morning that terrible summer in southern Saskatchewan. Margaret Olson woke up at 4:30 a.m. with dirt in her mouth. The grit crunched between her teeth. It had filtered through the wet sheets she had hung over every window, through the rags stuffed in every crack, through the kerosene-soaked cloths pressed against the door frames. The dust found its way inside no matter what you did. She looked at her husband, Eric, still sleeping beside her. A fine layer of brown powder covered his face, like death had already claimed him. The white of his pillow had turned completely brown. When he finally opened his eyes, the only clean parts of his face were the two pale ovals where his eyelids had protected his skin. This is the story of the Canadian dust apocalypse, and it will change everything you thought you knew about survival. Before we continue, let me paint you a picture of what normal life looked like in the Canadian prairies before the disaster struck, because you need to understand what these people lost before you can understand the horror of what happened to them. In the 1920s, southern Saskatchewan was called the breadbasket of the world. The wheat grew so tall that children could hide in it. The soil was black and rich, full of the accumulated nutrients from 10,000 years of prairie grass. Farmers came from all over Europe, from Ukraine, from Sweden, from Germany, drawn by the promise of free land and endless opportunity. Eric Olson had arrived from Norway in 1912 with nothing but $20 and a dream. By 1928, he owned 640 acres of prime wheat land. He had built a 2-story farmhouse with indoor plumbing. He had 3 children, a new Ford automobile, and money in the bank. He thought he had found paradise, but paradise was built on borrowed time. The Canadian government had encouraged farmers to plow up millions of acres of native prairie grass. Nobody understood that the grass was the only thing holding the soil in place. Nobody realized that the exceptionally wet years of the early 1920s were an anomaly, not the norm. When the rains stopped in 1929, nobody worried at first. When the rains didn't come in 1930, people started to pray. When 1931 arrived with temperatures reaching 110 degrees Fahrenheit and not a single drop of rain for months, the prayers turned to screams. And then the wind started to blow. July 5th, 1931, 5 a.m. Margaret is standing in her kitchen trying to make breakfast. The wood stove is burning low because they're rationing fuel. There's no point in cooking anything elaborate because the children won't eat it. The dust ruins everything. She tries to make porridge. She covers the pot with a damp cloth while it cooks, but when she lifts the lid, the surface is already gray with dust. She scrapes it off with a spoon, but there's more underneath. The dust has mixed into the oatmeal itself. Her youngest daughter, Anna, who is only 4 years old, refuses to eat. The child has been coughing for 3 weeks straight. Every night, Margaret listens to her daughter's lungs rattling like paper bags filled with sand. The doctor in town called it dust pneumonia. He said there was nothing he could do. Just keep her inside, he said. Keep her away from the dust. But there is no away from the dust. The dust is everywhere. The dust is everything. At 6:30 a.m., Eric goes outside to check on the animals, or what remains of them. They started the year with 40 head of cattle, 12 horses, and 100 chickens. Now they have 8 cattle, 4 horses, and maybe 20 chickens. The rest starved to death because there was nothing to feed them. The pastures are bare dirt. The hay they stored last year was consumed months ago. The surviving cattle stand listlessly in the barnyard. Their ribs are showing through their skin. Their eyes are crusted shut with dust and dried mucus. Eric has been feeding them Russian thistle. the only thing that will grow in this apocalypse. The cattle don't want to eat it. He doesn't blame them. The thistles are so dry and sharp, they cut the animals' mouths until they bleed. But it's Russian thistle or nothing. Eric looks out at what used to be his wheat fields. There is no wheat. There hasn't been wheat for 2 years. What he sees instead is bare soil, cracked into hexagonal patterns like the hide of some ancient reptile. In places, the wind has scoured the earth down to the hardpan, exposing rocks that haven't seen daylight in 10,000 years. In other places, the dust has drifted into dunes. Against the east side of his barn, the drift is already 8 feet high. He's had to dig out the barn doors 3 times this week. The wind never stops. Even now, at 6 in the morning, he can feel it tugging at his clothes, carrying its endless cargo of fine particulate matter. Every breath is an act of faith. Every inhalation brings more dust into his lungs. At 7:30 a.m., the children wake up. Thomas is 12, old enough to help with the farm work that doesn't exist anymore. Helen is 9, quiet and serious, already carrying the weight of adult worries on her thin shoulders. And little Anna, 4 years old, who can't remember a time before the dust. Margaret makes them wash their faces with water from the cistern. The water is brown and gritty. It has to be strained through cheesecloth 3 times before it's drinkable. Even then, you can feel the grit between your teeth. Breakfast is dust porridge and weak tea. There's no milk because the cows are too sick to produce. There's no sugar because they can't afford it. There's no butter because there's no cream. Thomas asks if he can go play outside. Margaret laughs, but there's no humor in it. Outside, the air is brown. The sun is a dim red disk behind the haze. You can't see the neighbor's farm, which is only a quarter mile away. The dust closes in like fog, but fog that scratches and burns and suffocates. At 8:15 a.m., Helen finds a dead chicken behind the house. The bird's eyes are crusted shut with dust. Its feathers are matted with dirt. Its crop is full of dust because that's all it had to eat. Helen is old enough to understand that this represents lost eggs, lost income, one more nail in the coffin of their survival. She doesn't cry. She hasn't cried in months. There's no point in crying. Eric is in the barn, trying to fix the windmill pump. The water table has dropped 60 feet since the drought began. The old well went dry in May. He dug a new one, deeper, but the water it produces is alkaline and bitter. Still, it's water. Without it, they're dead. The windmill mechanism is clogged with dust. Everything is clogged with dust. The gears grind against the fine particulate, wearing themselves away. Eric knows he doesn't have the money to buy new parts. He knows the windmill will fail eventually. When it does, they'll have to abandon the farm. He's not ready to admit that yet. He's not ready to admit that everything he's worked for is gone. At 10 a.m., the temperature is already 98 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky is a sickly yellow-brown. The horizon has disappeared entirely. The world has shrunk to a few hundred yards in every direction. Everything beyond that lost in the swirling murk. Margaret hangs wet sheets over the children's beds again. She does this 4 times a day. The sheets dry within an hour and have to be re-wet. It's a Sisyphean task, but it's the only thing that keeps the children from suffocating in their sleep. She finds a dead mouse behind the stove. It, too, is coated in dust. Its lungs failed. She doesn't bother to tell Eric. One more death doesn't matter anymore. At 11:30 a.m., a car appears on the road. This is unusual. Nobody travels unless they have to. The roads are treacherous, covered in drifting dust that can bury a vehicle in minutes. But this car keeps coming, crawling through the brown murk like a beetle through mud. It's Reverend Johansson from the church in town. He's making rounds, checking on his congregation, or what remains of it. 3 families have abandoned their farms this week alone, loaded their possessions onto wagons and trucks, and headed north, looking for anywhere the dust hasn't killed the land. Reverend Johansson shares what news he has. The Thompson farm has been foreclosed. The bank took everything. The Petersons' youngest son died of dust pneumonia last week. He was only 7. The Hendricksons found their entire herd of cattle dead in the pasture, suffocated during the black blizzard that came through on Thursday. Eric asks about relief aid. The government has promised help. Surely help is coming. Reverend Johansson shakes his head. The relief trains are delayed. There's not enough money. There's not enough food. The country is in the grip of the Great Depression. People in the cities are starving too. Nobody has anything to spare. At 12:30 p.m., Margaret tries to make lunch. She opens the last can of vegetables from her cellar. The seal has failed. Dust has gotten inside. The vegetables are ruined. She scrapes the top layer off and uses what's underneath, but she knows it's probably contaminated. It doesn't matter. They have to eat something. The children choke down their meal in silence. Anna coughs continuously. Her lips are cracked and bleeding. Her hair, which used to be golden, is now permanently brown from the dust that no amount of washing can remove. After lunch, the sky grows darker. Eric knows what this means. He's seen it before. He runs outside, screaming for everyone to get to the cellar. At 1:47 p.m., the black blizzard hits. This is not an ordinary dust storm. This is something from the end of the world. A wall of darkness 60 feet high, moving at 40 miles per hour, carrying millions of tons of topsoil stripped from the dying land. The front edge is black as midnight, rolling and boiling like thunderclouds laid on their side. The temperature drops 20 degrees in 30 seconds. The wind hits like a fist. The air becomes solid with particulate matter. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. You cannot breathe. You cannot think. You can only endure. In the cellar, the family huddles together while the world ends above them. The roar is indescribable, like 1,000 trains passing overhead. Fine dust filters down through the cellar doors, through every crack and gap, coating everything in a new layer of brown. Anna is screaming. Her lungs cannot handle the dust. Margaret holds a wet cloth over her daughter's face, praying, begging any god who might be listening to spare her child. Helen sits rigid, staring at nothing, her mind retreating to somewhere safer than this hellscape. Thomas tries to be brave, but his hands are shaking. Eric thinks about his father, who died in a blizzard in Norway. At least that was clean. At least that was cold. This is a filthy death. A death that fills your lungs with the corpse of the land itself. The storm lasts 3 hours. When they emerge at 5:01 p.m., the world has changed. The barn is half buried. The house has drifts against it that reach the second-floor windows. The chicken coop has collapsed entirely. The few surviving chickens are dead, buried under the dust. The windmill has fallen. The tower, weakened by months of dust wearing away at the metal, finally gave way in the wind. It lies twisted in the yard, a skeleton of what it used to be. Without the windmill, they have no water. Without water, they cannot survive. Eric stands in the ruined yard, looking at everything he's lost. 16 years of work. Everything he owned. Everything he dreamed. Gone in an afternoon. Margaret stands beside him. She doesn't say anything. What is there to say? At 6:01 p.m., they go through the house assessing the damage. Dust has penetrated everything. The beds are covered. The clothes in the closets are covered. The food in the pantry is covered. Even the food in the ice box, which they can barely afford to keep supplied with ice, is covered. Margaret finds the family Bible on the shelf. It's open. Dust has collected on the pages, obscuring the words. She brushes it off gently. The page beneath reads, "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away." She doesn't know if she believes that anymore. At 7:20 p.m., a neighbor arrives. It's Henrik Gustafsson from the farm 2 miles north. He has news. Bad news. The government is offering relief trains, but only to those who will relocate to northern Saskatchewan. Free land, they're calling it. A chance to start over. But you have to sign away your farm. You have to admit defeat. Eric asks about staying, about waiting for the rain to come back. Henrik laughs bitterly. "The soil is gone," he says, "blown away to Montana and North Dakota. Even if the rain comes back tomorrow, it will take a generation for the land to recover. Even if they survive this year, and the next, there's nothing left to farm. The breadbasket of the world is dead." At 8:00 p.m., the family sits down to their evening meal. It's the last of the canned meat, mixed with the last of the flour to make a thin gravy. There's no bread. The flour is full of weevils and dust. They eat in silence, listening to the wind that never stops, feeling the grit between their teeth. After dinner, Margaret puts the children to bed. Anna's cough is worse. Her fever has returned. Margaret doesn't have any medicine. The doctor is 20 miles away. The roads are impassable. She sits beside her daughter's bed, holding the child's hand, watching her struggle to breathe. The wet sheet over the window has already dried. Fine dust filters in continuously. Anna's face is coated with it. Margaret thinks about what she read in the newspaper last month. How the dust from the prairie is blowing all the way to Ottawa, all the way to ships in the Atlantic Ocean. The entire continent is choking on the corpse of the Canadian breadbasket. At 10:20 p.m., Eric sits on the porch, looking at the darkness. There are no stars. There haven't been stars in weeks. The dust blocks everything. The moon, when it rises, is red as blood. He thinks about his father again, about the stories his father told of hard times in Norway, of famines and winters that killed half the village. His father survived those. His father came to Canada to escape them. But Canada has become worse than anything his father ever faced. At midnight, Anna's fever spikes. She's delirious, calling out for water, for her grandmother who died 3 years ago, for anyone who can make the pain stop. Margaret packs wet cloths around her daughter's body, trying to bring the fever down. She knows it's probably futile. She's seen other children die from dust pneumonia. The dust destroys the lungs. Then the infections move in. Then the fever takes them. At 2:00 a.m., Anna's breathing becomes easier. The fever breaks. Margaret allows herself to hope. At 3:00 a.m., Eric finally comes to bed. He doesn't sleep. He lies awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind, calculating how long they can survive without the windmill. 3 days, maybe, if they ration severely, if they don't let the remaining animals drink anything, if they're lucky. At 4 a.m., the wind picks up again. Another storm is coming. They can feel it in the pressure drop, in the static electricity that makes their hair stand on end, in the animal terror that grips their hearts. Margaret gets up to check on the children. Thomas is sleeping fitfully, whimpering in his dreams. Helen is awake, staring at the ceiling, her eyes too old for her face. Anna is sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Margaret stands in her ruined kitchen, looking out through the dust-caked window at the brown darkness beyond. She thinks about the letters she's received from her sister in Vancouver. describing green forests and clean rain and air you can breathe without dying. She thinks about giving up. At 4:30 a.m., she wakes up with dirt in her mouth, same as every morning. The grit crunches between her teeth. The dust has found its way inside, no matter what she did. But this morning, something is different. This morning, she makes a decision. At 5:00 a.m., she wakes Eric. She tells him they're leaving. Today, before the next storm hits, before Anna gets worse, before they lose everything, including their lives. Eric protests. This is their home. This is everything they've worked for. Margaret looks at him with eyes that have seen too much death. This isn't a home, she says. This is a grave, and I won't bury my children in it. At 6:00 a.m., they start packing. Only what will fit in the Ford. Only what they absolutely need. The family Bible, the photographs, the children's warmest clothes, the last of the food. They leave behind the furniture Eric built with his own hands, the dishes from their wedding, the quilts Margaret's grandmother made, the memories of 16 years of hope and struggle. At 7:01 a.m., the children wake up to find their world being dismantled. Thomas helps load the car without complaint. He's seen his friends leave, one by one. He knew this day was coming. Helen holds Anna, keeping the wet cloth over her sister's face, protecting her from the dust that is everywhere. At 8:01 a.m., Eric takes one last walk around the farm. The wheat fields that don't exist. The barn that is half buried. The fallen windmill. The ghosts of cattle and horses and hopes. He doesn't cry. He's beyond crying. At 8:30 a.m., the family piles into the Ford. Eric turns the key. The engine coughs, struggles, catches. It's been months since they could afford gasoline. This tank might be their last. Margaret looks back at the farmhouse as they drive away. The house she painted, the garden she planted, the clothesline where she hung her children's diapers. All of it disappearing behind them into the brown murk. She doesn't look back again. At 9 a.m., they reach the main road. They're not alone. A caravan of vehicles stretches ahead and behind, all heading north. The exodus of the prairies. The death march of the breadbasket. In the cars and trucks and wagons are families like theirs. People who came to Canada with dreams and are leaving with nothing. People who built empires of wheat and watched them blow away in the wind. People who are running from the apocalypse, looking for anywhere that isn't dying. Nobody speaks. What is there to say? At noon, they stop by the side of the road to eat their meager lunch and rest the engine. Another black blizzard is visible to the south, a wall of darkness consuming the horizon. They're staying ahead of it. Barely. Anna's cough has improved slightly. The farther north they go, the cleaner the air becomes. The sky is still brown, but it's a lighter brown. You can almost see the sun. At 3:00 p.m., they reach the relief station at Prince Albert. There are thousands of people here, living in tents and shacks and cars. The government is distributing food and assigning land in the Northern Territories. Free land, they call it. A chance to start over. But Eric and Margaret have seen this before. In 1912, they called the Southern Prairies free land, too. A chance to start over. Paradise. How long before this paradise dies as well? At 5 p.m., they receive their assignment. A quarter section north of La Ronge. Forested land that will have to be cleared. Cold winters and short summers. Nothing like the golden wheat fields they left behind. But there's water. There's rain. There's air you can breathe. At 7 p.m., they make camp with the other refugees. Someone has started a fire. People are sharing what little food they have. Someone is playing a harmonica, a mournful tune that speaks of loss and longing and the desperate hope that tomorrow will be better. Thomas asks if they'll ever go back home. Margaret looks south, toward the brown sky, toward the land that is dying, toward everything they lost. "No," she says, "there's nothing to go back to." At 10:15 p.m., the children fall asleep in the back of the Ford. Anna's breathing is easier than it's been in weeks. The clean air is already helping. Eric and Margaret sit by the fire, holding hands, not speaking. They have lost everything. Their farm, their savings, their dreams, their past. They have nothing left but each other and their children. But they're alive. And tomorrow, they'll start again. The Canadian dust apocalypse of the 1930s displaced over 250,000 people. Entire communities were abandoned. The soil that took 10,000 years to build was stripped away in a single decade. Some areas have never fully recovered. The Olsen family was fictional, but their story was real. It was lived by thousands of families across the Canadian prairies. Families who came with dreams and left with nothing. Families who watched their children suffocate on the very land that was supposed to give them a future. The dust storms weren't natural disasters. They were man-made catastrophes, caused by agricultural practices that destroyed the delicate prairie ecosystem. The land was murdered, and everyone who lived on it paid the price. Today, when you drive through southern Saskatchewan, you can still see the scars, the abandoned farmhouses slowly collapsing into the earth, the windbreaks planted by the survivors to hold the soil in place, the memories of the people who lived and died in the dust apocalypse. This is history we were never taught. This is survival we can barely imagine. This is the truth about what happened when humans thought they could conquer nature, and nature fought back. Subscribe for more forgotten histories. The past is not as comfortable as we like to pretend.